Welcome everyone to the Academy for Teachers mini masterclass with Nancy Tarshish. I'm Sam Swope, and on behalf of the Academy for Teachers, welcome to everyone here and in our live stream audience. These master classes, like all of the Academy's non-pandemic master classes, bring the world's most brilliant people together with some of the greatest teachers in New York. So this is a wonderful occasion today to bring Nancy Tarshis. I've known Nancy personally for a long time now, and when she was working at Einstein Medical College with, what was it called, the Children's Evaluation and Rehab Center. And now she works at Quad Preparatory School. Nancy has made her specialty working with special needs kids, I think you could say that, wouldn't you? Or twice exceptional, you call them.
Both.
Both.
Yes.
And Nancy, thank you so much for doing this today. I would like to introduce you to these marvelous teachers. Have fun with them. Thank you for doing this.
My pleasure. Okay, so I'm actually going to share my screen. So, because I have a brain that thinks in PowerPoint. So let me make that smaller so I can still see lots of faces. Maybe I can't make it smaller. It won't let me. Okay, so, well, let me just try one more time there we go. Now, all right, great. So let me do one more thing here. Sorry, just trying to organize my screen. There we go. Great. Okay, so today I want to talk to you about imagination, as I said, but for me, imagination is not just that thing that we have that takes us out of time and space and place, but it really is a window. It's a window. And for me, when I think about imagination and I think about children, I think about imagination is the window through which you are able to dream your future. And I do a lot of work with kids who have difficulty harnessing imagination. So, and I work in systems who have a hard time sometimes understanding how we harness imagination in young children. So I spend a lot of time teaching about play and the importance of play. I am very certain I am preaching to the choir with this group, so I won't go too deeply into that. But I want you to know that I spend my whole day playing. I play with kids, I play with ideas, I play with my family, I play in the garden. My whole life is about a playful endeavor. I feel now more than ever it is incredibly important to harness that for myself. So let's see. So what is it? You know, it's a classroom seat, it's a movie theater seat, it's an airplane seat, it's something. But this is here because somebody thought of it. It used to be hundreds, thousands of years ago, humans sat on dirt. At some point, somebody imagined this idea that it would be really great to raise your behind off the dirt. It might be warmer, it might be more comfortable. I don't know, I wasn't there. But this exists because somebody thought of it. And I want us to think about imagination very, very broadly. You can take a look around your room. Every object in your room, in your sphere, in your sight is there because somebody thought of it. It took someone to imagine that into being. We think of imagination most of the time, I think when we're, as teachers, I think we think a lot about imagination as play, and it is. But really, every time you talk and your children have to understand what you're saying, they're actually sharing an imagination with you. Because if anything you're talking about doesn't exist in front of them in that moment, they have to imagine it. That's what abstract thinking is. So I want to show you a small clip, just because I like to start with small clips and it's fun.
Hey! Oh! Oh! Oh, Monica! It's so beautiful! I know! So, I'm here, ready to play. Okay. I brought a bunch of stuff for the house, so check it out. What's this? That's a dog. Every house should have a dog. Not one that can pee on the roof. Maybe it's so big because the house was built on radioactive waste.
And is this in case the house sneezes?
No, that's the ghost for the attic. I don't want a ghost. Well, nobody wants a ghost. But you've got one. Because the house is sitting on an ancient Indian burial ground.
Wait a minute, the house was built on radioactive waste and an ancient Indian burial ground. That would never happen.
Okay, obviously you don't know much about the U.S. government. Dinosaur attack! Quick, everybody into the house! All right, you know what? That's it. That's it. Right? No dinosaurs, no ghosts, no giant dogs, okay? They're not the right size, they're not Victorian, and they just don't go. Dinosaur, we're not welcome in the house of no imagination.
While we're hovering around the subject, I just have to say that dinosaurs, they don't go rough.
The little ones do. Hey!
Oh.
Oh!
Wait. So imagination is the seed of innovation. It's the idea. It's thinking of a chair. It's thinking of one of these that most of us can't live without anymore. It's coming up with an idea that isn't actually present to your senses, something you can't see, smell, hear, touch, taste. It's conjuring newness from thoughts. For me, it's the catalyst for transforming knowledge into ideas. That's what imagination is. And you know, as a teacher, and I know all of you have worked with students who have knowledge, and knowledge is great. But how do we take what we know and turn it into an idea, a usable idea, an idea that conjures a new world, a new place, a new thing? As a teacher, that's actually our job, is to take these seeds of knowledge and help our kids turn them into something. But your imagination is also your personal meaning maker. Every time you think about yourself, you think about who you are, who you want to be, and you make even the smallest change. And look, every one of you has a different hairstyle now than you did 3 weeks ago, admit it. Because you can't get a haircut, you can't get a hair color, you can't. So that might not be true for Sam, but it is true for the rest of us. So every time you conjure an idea about change, that's your imagination. Imagination is how we take our experiences, we integrate them into our current selves, and we integrate that current self into our imagined self of the future. And I know that's a really kind of funny idea, but Well, these days we talk a lot about self-regulation, and we talk a lot about behavior, and we talk a lot about how we engage our kids and get them to regulate, especially in front of a screen, enough to take in the information. Well, it's actually your imagination. It's actually your ability to project yourself into the future and imagine how you're going to feel that keeps you from doing whatever it is you want to do. Some of you may feel like you want to get up and move around. Well, actually, you should. It's okay with me. But some of you, you know, when I sit and watch my kids in front of a screen, I'm watching, or in a classroom, what keeps a kid sitting there listening to a teacher? Because let's face it, I think we're all interesting, but not every minute of every day. What keeps our kids from raising their hands and telling us this is boring? If you are a parent, what keeps your kid from smacking their sibling? Well, what keeps them from doing it is not necessarily knowing that it's wrong, but actually imagining how they're going to feel if they do that wrong. Our imagination is what fuels our self-regulation. It's our ability to project ourselves into the future and have empathy with ourselves and figure out how I have to figure out how I'm going to feel. The adult example I always like to give is driving down a highway. So you're driving down the highway and you want to turn off the exit. Only there's a really long, you get to, you know, you're about a half a mile from the exit and there's a lot of traffic and there are all these people who are in the far right lane waiting to make their turn off the exit. And then there is always that person who drives in the breakdown lane to get by that line, or who drives up really fast and like cuts in at the last second. So what keeps all of you, some of you may be that person, I hope not, but what keeps you from doing that? What keeps you from doing that is, one, following rules, but what also keeps you from doing that is realizing you don't want to be that person, imagining how you're going to feel about yourself if you are that person, and deciding you're not. That ability to project yourself is your imagination. And we learn that imagination, that projecting self, in play when we're young. That's where it starts. Your imagination is your future picture. All of you went to graduate school. You had to have a vision for yourself, what you thought you were going to get the end of this, to send yourself down that path. That future picture, your executive functioning, your ability to set a goal and see it through, exists in your imagination. That's how you get things done. Think about packing a suitcase in a hurry. You run into the room and you picture all the items where they are. Your ability to develop that picture, that idea in your brain, that thought, is part of your imagination. You're imagining the object as it moves. So we teach imagination because it gives kids agency. Without imagination, we're kind of stuck in the nowness of now. There's no if then without an imagination. There's no ability to make a plan, to set a goal, a goal is an imagined change, an imagined object, an imagined desire. That's a goal. You have to have that picture in order to create it. So I teach imagination because I want the kids I work with to have agency. I teach imagination because it's the only way to have flexible thinking. You know, I think we all have areas of our life that are challenging for us. Technology can be one of those things that's challenging for me sometimes. And the minute that something happens, I lose all of my flexible thinking. I lose all of my flexible thinking, and I can't even imagine how to solve my problem. And I've actually had to teach myself a mantra kind of what to do and what not to do. And the first is, you know, take your hands off the first thing is take your hands off the keyboard. But the second thing is think of ideas. I teach flexible thinking because that's what problem solving is. There isn't one way to solve a problem. And to be a good problem solver, you have to think flexibly. And that requires your imagination because you have to conjure ideas. I teach imagination because it gives kids the opportunity to have their own independent learning strategies. And I teach imagination because it's perspective taking. The only way to really understand characters in a book is to imagine yourself in their shoes, to imagine what they're thinking, to imagine what they're feeling, to imagine what they might do next. That's perspective taking. And, you know, helping kids to imagine themselves as other teaches them that. And they learn that in play. I teach this is a big one. I teach imagination because it's counterfactual reasoning. And I know that some of you probably read the homework and so have a better understanding, but essentially counterfactual reasoning is that if-then thinking, that if this, then that. It's that projection into the future to imagine alternate realities. And I teach imagination because it's fun and creative. And I think, you know, I imagine that most of you can see where this is building in the sense of why I teach play. Because this is what play is. Play is agency for young children. Play is flexible thinking. Play is independent learning strategy. So, you know, creativity is actually a habit. It is something there are some of us like me who used to say, oh, I'm not creative. I mean, I'm married to a person who I believe is truly creative. He's a music maker. And I used to say I wasn't creative until I figured out that, first of all, creativity is a habit. And it's a habit that allows you to kind of shift and change based on unexpected circumstances. To be creative is to think flexibly, is to solve problems. When you're creative, you're actually open to new ideas. You don't necessarily have to have them yourself. You can actually just be open to them. It's a broader definition. When you're creative, you can actually understand the perspective of other people better because you can allow for the fact that there's more than one way. When you're creative, you're more likely to see multiple solutions for a problem. And I practice at creativity because it doesn't always come naturally to me, that thinking flexibly, that seeing a broader scope. And I do think that creativity is something children have to practice. We have to give them many opportunities to practice creativity on all fronts. Creativity with numbers, creativity with words, creativity with pictures, creativity with movement, anything you can think of to do as a human being, there's a creative way to approach it if we broaden that scope. So I know, you know, I know I'm moving really quickly through ideas. I just want to make sure that I give us grounding for this. thinking about how do you teach imagination? How do you actually teach it? Well, and how do you teach creativity? Well, you create a condition of possibility. That's what you do. You create the conditions of possibility for your kids. What does that mean? It means you set up a platform. You set up a platform where they need to use the things that these creative skills, their flexible thinking, their problem solving. I want to give you some very specific examples because when I think about what I like to get away as a teacher, I like to walk away with something I can use tomorrow. I can think about doing with my kids. So I'm giving you sort of a structure for how I go about this. How do we do this? We scaffold kids. We give them visuals, we practice it, we create challenge, we play. What does that look like? Well, it looks like this. Here's a project. My kids are working right now on creating a project. And what they are doing is they are working with little tiny robots called Ozobots. And they're little codable robots. And what they're doing here is creating a city. We wanted them to create a city for these little codable robots, which are electronic and obviously not animate beings exactly. So the kids had to first sort of think about, well, what would a city for these things look like? And then what you can see is their plan. And that plan is very specifically nonlinear, because working with young children, what I've discovered is as soon as I put something in a linear way, they think it has to go from one end to the other. And if they make a mistake, and if it doesn't happen exactly the way they thought, oftentimes it falls apart for them. And when I started to create a nonlinear view, making a changing your plan, doing it differently, never felt like they were going backwards and starting over. So every time I write a plan for kids, it's nonlinear, because we're so stuck in that idea of beginning, middle, end, that I don't want them to see imagination like that. So here they are. The first thing we do is we make our plan, we set it up, we make it visual. What you see here is a station. And the station is there because I also work with kids with executive function challenges. So they need, I set up the organization for them initially until they get ready to organize themselves. And then what you can see here is they have an idea, they brainstorm, they created departments. So there were the designers, there were the builders, there were the fabricators, there were the checkers, there were the blueprinters. Everybody had different jobs. And then they got their materials organized, then they made their plan, then they did their building. And then every imagination, every building, every project session always has a check-in. And then most often the spiral goes back to brainstorm, new idea, more plan. So it's like this ever spiraling concept. Here you can see them. This was a multi-week project. So the scaffold, we kind of have our list of things to do. This is just another, I wanted to show you this because these are what my lists and ideas often work with my kids. We've got things that are going wrong, things that are going right. We've got imagination, we've got what we have to do, because my kids need to see these things written out. The challenges I give them have to be just right, which means they have to be interesting. They have to be unusual. When I'm working on imagination, I'm always working on solving practical problems. Kids like to be employed. They like to feel important. They like to feel what they're doing is meaningful. Every challenge I work on in this sphere with my kids in school or wherever I'm working with them, most of the time when I'm creating a challenge, I have to make it hard enough that the first thing they come up with definitely isn't going to work. I have to try to think through their brains and make sure I know what the easy solution is and make sure the easy solution won't work. But it also has to be easy enough that there is a solution because they can't get too frustrated. And that's hard to design that. You have to know your kids well. So here's what it actually looks like. We read our kids a newspaper article about all these animals that went missing from a zoo in Germany. And then we said to them, okay, you guys, here's what we want you to do. Here are a bunch of Legos. Here are some plastic animals. We want you, and we also had, we had circuits and buzzers and lights. You know, they were using like Lego tech materials that we had gathered. And we basically said to them, we want you to create a zoo where the animals can't escape, but it's also going to be an okay place to live. So, here.
Mariam.
When nighttime comes, what do we want to happen? Do we want the animals to escape?
No.
So what do we need?
We need the light.
And
the buzzer.
the buzzer in case they move by. Uh-oh. Nighttime's coming and I see a lion coming out of the cage. It's getting darker. That's, you know, what I have to tell you about these kids are half of those kids have never been to a zoo. Literally, we polled them. They live in the Bronx. They've never been to the zoo. So they had to kind of really go very far into imagining what this could be. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I want to play a game with you guys. So I'm going to call on you. So I need to put on my glasses so I can see. Can we unmute the room? Is that possible? So here's how this game goes. It's called Hooray and Oh No. And Hooray is something really great that solves the problem that was created by Oh No. So here's what I mean. I'm going to start and I'm going to offer a hooray. And then I'm going to make Sam go next. And Sam's going to say, oh no, and create a problem with my hooray. And then I will go again just to kind of show you how it works. And then I'm going to start calling on you guys.
What sort of a problem?
That's up to you, Sam. Use your imagination.
Okay, hooray.
So, hooray! After this, I'm going on a picnic dinner.
Oh no, it's going to rain and you'll get wet.
Hooray! I just got a new wetsuit. Rachel.
Oh no, there's too many people at the park. You can't have a picnic there.
Carolyn, fix that.
Hooray! The park just opened up a whole new section and we can all spread out.
And Jiri, oh no.
Oh my. Oh no. Some random authorities came and closed the park again.
Vanessa, hooray.
Hooray. We can have a virtual picnic.
Isabel, oh no.
Oh no, the internet just went down.
Sheila, hooray.
Hooray! I was able to call the internet company and get it fixed today in 2 hours.
Okay, let's start a new one. Madeline, can you start us off with a hooray? Anything you want.
Sure. Hooray, it is a bright, sunshiny day today.
Sonia.
Oh no, I got a sunburn.
Kristen.
Hooray, I found some aloe to soothe my sunburn.
Megan.
Oh no, I'm allergic to aloe.
Lalena.
But hooray, I found some non-aloe stuff that came from outer space and it turns me green, but it's totally fine because I really like being green.
Sally. Oh no.
Oh no, now all of my neighbors want the same green stuff, but I don't want to share.
Okay, one more start. Laura, can you start a new one?
Sure. Hooray, today is the day I get to go to art and I'm gonna draw a dragon.
Elizabeth.
Oh no, all of my colored pencils have broken tips.
Catherine.
Hooray, one of the aliens that came back with the non-aloe lotion has this fabulous pencil sharpener.
Yeah.
Oh no, the pencil sharpener gets shards of pencil all over the place and it's sticking to everything.
Hooray, we'll use those shards to make a new art project.
Oh. Renee, end it for us.
Wow, and that's an oh no, right? Oh no, the art project is too big to get out of the door, so nobody can see it.
Well done. So, I love that. I have to tell you that I have been playing this game with 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds and all the way up through the ages. I also play it with my young adults that I work with. You know, we're really in a funny place here because we have to find ways to play with imagination in the remote sphere. And so I think that you know, that game, to me, is very illustrative of our one's ability to think creative, to stay connected to the thoughts of others. None of you could play that game if you couldn't share imagination. You see, it's not enough to have your own. You actually have to share and jump into somebody else's. Every one of you stayed connected. Your thoughts connected to the person next to you. Well, on my screen anyway. But connected all along, which means you had to stay engaged and you had to stay thoughtful and you had to stay connected and you had to hear the idea and you had to imagine what the problem or the solution could be. So I want to just go back for 1 second and finish this. Just to say, you know, imagination fuels the capacity for change and greater personal growth. None of us could grow and change as a human being without an imagination. And that's so important. It fuels an increased range of emotional experience. The fact that any of us can read a book and cry with a character, laugh with a character, sing with a character, that's your imagination. That character is not there. That is the author's imagination and your ability to jump into it. Imagination fuels a sense of adventure because it gives you limitless possibility. But imagination also fuels your heart and soul, your hopes and your dreams. Your ability to dream a future, your ability to dream a future for your kids rests in your imagination. You as teachers, every day you walk into the room and dream of change and dream and imagine a future for your kids. You're not just teaching them today, you're imagining their future and you're building that for them. So go to it. Go out and shape that future. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let's open the floor for questions.
I can actually see everybody.
Oh, great.
So you want to raise a hand and
I have a question for you, Nancy. Am I unmuted?
You are.
I have a question for you. To the extent that I understand what you're saying, you're defining imagination very broadly, but do you discriminate between the imagination that you've been describing and imagination that most of us came into this thinking imagination wise, where you imagine castles and fairies, or someone who's creative, that kind of an imagination?
You can't, no. And I don't, because the foundation of castles and fairies and all of that is your ability to have a picture in your mind. Castles and fairies don't exist until somebody imagines them, until somebody plans them, thinks them into being.
Sort of a follow-up question to that is, can imagination be taught, or is it you just facilitate it? And if the teacher wasn't involved in setting up these platforms, would the children not learn imaginative play?
Oh no, a lot of them would. A lot of them would. But the problem is, and some of you have been, I can tell, I think by looking at you, have been teaching longer than others. The problem is that kids are coming to school differently. And what fuels imagination, what fuels creativity, what fuels this flexible problem solving is the pretend play, is playing. And kids are playing less. That's the sad fact. I can see head nods. You can't see, well, maybe you can, Sam. But kids are playing less. And so it's more important to teach this than it used to be. And anything that impacts, any learning issue that impacts a person's ability to think abstractly and critically is going to impact their ability to fully realize their imagination. And that's why it also needs to get work done. Because some individuals have some of the seeds, but not all of them.
And it's also, maybe someone else has a question.
Vanessa has her hand up. Yeah, Go right ahead.
I think you brought up the important point that I about the inequity of the challenge of inequity that's become so apparent in this distance learning, but also in having them develop that imagination. And I've seen the greatness of it, but also like struggling to pull it out of children who don't have the access, or like the historical article showed, there are just certain situations that make it less, or give children less opportunities for that.
Right. I think we're all going to, assuming the world, and it will, rights itself is 6 months from now, whatever, I think 5 years from now, there's going to be a fascinating study done about all of this. The impact of all of this on play, creativity, imagination, among other things, Other questions?
Yeah, it looks like Laura has her hand up.
Yep.
Hi, I do. I am interested because many of us are thinking about not this year with remote learning, but the beginning of next year, where we will have children that we do not know and they do not know us. Yeah, Lelania, I know. And part of why I'm interested in thinking about imagination in a much broader context is I won't be in the same room facilitating play and providing materials, but I feel very seriously that I will need to be more creative in the ways that I invite them to live in imaginary worlds together, and as a way of getting to know them and having them get to know me, and then move along into something else in the 6th, 7th, first grade world. But wondering your ideas on how we could create a beginning of the year based on using our creativity and imagination.
Well, I think you need to set common ground. So when you know, most of your kids are neurotypical, so in a sense, it's not like, I know you don't walk into a classroom, put them in an area and say, go play and walk away. I get that. But they don't need as much help from you. But in this situation, they are going to need your help. And part of the help they're going to need is that common ground. So think about using literacy. Think about play acting a story after everybody's read the same story. So start with something where a shared experience, because kids play what they know, right? So you have to create that shared experience for them in order to help them to be able to play.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Lara?
Hey, Nancy, I think you evaluated my daughter at Einstein a few years ago. I was trying to remember why your name sounded familiar. But I teach kids who are learning English as a second language because their parents are deaf, many of them, or they themselves are deaf or hard of hearing. And what I've noticed and what I've been told is that people who, for whom ASL is their first language, they're very concrete thinkers. And so I teach pre-K, I teach everyone in the school pre-K to 12, but so I've sat in front of 3- and 4-year-olds and say, let's pretend we're brushing our teeth, and they can't do it. So I'm wondering if there's some relationship between language and imagination, or what you can say about that.
Yes, there's definitely for many of us, language is how we realize we think in words. Some people think in pictures, but a lot of us think in words. And so I do know, because I actually have worked with the hearing impaired population, there is ASL tends to have hearing impairment. See, this is a really long, I'm trying to think about how to conceptualize a short answer to a very big question. To think imaginatively, one has to engage in abstract thought. When your thinking, as it is with the hearing impaired, is very much tied to the here and now, particularly as a young child, because they don't have the same experience with abstract linguistic abstraction, but also I'm sorry, I'm having a very hard, I'm struggling to think about how to explain this, because it is common knowledge that the hearing impaired, young children with hearing impairment are later to the table of abstract thought. That is in the literature. And the reason being that sign language is a very concrete, it's not figurative in any way. So pasteurized milk is past your eyes milk.
Wow.
So that's it concretized. Pasteurized is not pasteurized, but there is a concretizing of language that happens with ASL that leads to a more concrete bias in thinking, which is going to make imagination difficult for them from the point of view of pretending. See, pretending is only one aspect of imagination, but it is one that's very difficult, because in order to pretend, you have to get the picture in your brain of what that looks like in order to do it.
That's fascinating, Nancy. I mean, so are you saying that to what extent is language necessary for imagination to happen?
I think it's necessary for aspects of imagination to happen.
So imagination can happen without language. Does a 6-month-old imagine? I guess he does.
You know, yes, a 6-month-old has to be able to imagine. They have to be able to imagine, because if they can self-regulate to voice, and they can, they wake up, they're crying, they're hungry, they cry, and their parent says, I'm coming, you're okay, you're okay. That voice conjures a feeling of comfort that says, oh wait, I can calm down. That food, you know, they're gonna come because I hear the voice. So yes, but we can't test their imagination.